Hi guys, today we will be implementing a full production level CI/CD workflow with GitOps using ArgoCD. Now this is a full hands-on tutorial, so a small amount of experience is required with Git, Docker and Kubernetes. Although on the way I will be explaining everything, and if you don't have any prior experience with ArgoCD, there is no issue with that. I will be explaining everything to get you started. Okay. So before we start, let me introduce myself. I am Rishabh. I'm a full stack DevOps engineer. I basically upload videos related to programming, DevOps, cloud, and so if you like this type of content, do subscribe. So now let's get started with the video. Let's check out the stacks or the tools we will be using. So the first one is GitHub for hosting our repositories. And for CI part, that is the continuous integration part, we will be using GitHub Actions for integration, building our repos, and like deploying our application. Okay, with that we will be using Kubernetes for orchestration as an orchestration tool for our containers. Okay, and then we will be using ArgoCD, so which basically goes hand in hand with K8s. Okay, now let's basically understand what ArgoCD is briefly. So basically ArgoCD is a Kubernetes controller which basically monitors apps deployed on the cluster. So we as a user or admin just feed Kubernetes manifest files to ArgoCD, like the deployments, pods, services and all those stuff. We basically feed that to ArgoCD, and then rest ArgoCD will take care of all the deployments. So ArgoCD concept is pretty much similar with Git. So it uses the same push and pull architecture to deploy application over to the cluster. Now with ArgoCD we must maintain two repositories, one being the application where we host our Docker files and all the stuff, and the other the manifest file, and we will basically connect that repository to ArgoCD, from where any changes happens. It will basically pull the changes and push those changes to trigger a change. So if you're thinking what gibberish I'm saying, don't sweat it. We will try to understand everything in this tutorial, so yeah, just stick with me. Okay, now before we begin, I would like to tell you that all the tools we will be using will be free, which you can easily replicate locally so that you can play more with it. Okay, so we will not going to use some cloud clusters and all those. We will be using simple Kubernetes cluster locally. Although I will be pointing on different tools which are used in production application in the place of what we will be using locally. So yeah, so now that's out of the way, let's get started with the tutorial. So this is the full architecture which we will follow in this tutorial. So let's understand this quickly. So as a developer, or when a developer makes some changes or he or she pushes some code on the repo, a GitHub action will be triggered. Now in GitHub Actions we basically define different steps to follow in a hierarchy manner. So every steps will be dependent on each other. So if one step succeeds, only then the other step will be like initiated. Okay. And now generally there are many steps which can be added to a CI/CD pipeline, but for the sake of this video we will be using only a few. First being the test step, which will have test cases, although we don't have any in our case, but I will put it in just a case, so if you can follow this. After all the test passes, the next step is to build the application in the form of Docker image. Now we are working with a React application, so we'll build the React app which will output with an HTML file and bunch of JavaScript files. Now in this step we will tag the image and push it to Docker Hub to store the image as an repository. Okay, now the next step is to update the manifest which we will feed to ArgoCD. Now as ArgoCD follows GitOps pattern, that is push and pull, we need to maintain another repository just to host the manifest files. So as in the build step, our image is created. With the updated application code, we will use the same tagged image and update the manifest file with the image tag. Now this will be a change in a manifest repo which will be monitored by ArgoCD using different types of sync methods, one being the webhook provided by GitHub Actions. Okay, now as soon as the sync completes, ArgoCD will ask the Kate API server to update the application according to the manifest. So now this will result in a new updated application. Okay, now I know this must be very overwhelming, but we will look at the practical implementation and we will put all these pieces together and understand it more thoroughly. Okay, so let's see the code part. Okay, so in the code part, you can see we have two directories or two repos which we will be hosting on GitHub. So let's check the first one, the infra one, which basically consists of all the manifest configuration for the application to run on a Kubernetes cluster. So the first one is a simple deployment where we deploy a single replica of an application named as React application. Okay, now the image part here is crucial. This image part will be updated every time the application changes, like new feature or bug has been completed. So basically the image tag will be updated here as soon as there is some changes in the manifest image tag. Okay, now the second file is the service file. This will host a simple service file, which with the time being we will be using node port, but if we are working with a real application, this can be a load balancer or an ingress service. Okay, so this infra repository will be the one which ArgoCD will be laying its eyes on. So any changes in this repository will trigger a change. Okay, now the next repository is a simple React application with one Docker file where we basically build the app, which will have the HTML and JS files which can be served with Nginx over to port 80. So this is a simple Docker file which we will be using to deploy containers. Okay, so this is it from the code perspective. Now let's check out the most important part of the whole architecture, that is the pipeline. So what will happen when some changes occur? So this part, okay, from here to the ArgoCD part. Okay, so for that we will have a .github folder in our directory and we will push this to GitHub. This directory should be in the root folder of your application, and inside that we will put the pipeline configuration using an YAML file. Okay, now let's tear down this file step by step and understand what it is. Now the first thing we need to set is on to define which events can cause the workflow to run, so like on what branches. Okay, for simplicity purpose we will be using any push changes over the master branch. Okay, generally in production scenario this can be any other branch like feature or any pull request, something like that. Now let's look at jobs. So this is the most important part of a GitHub action workflow. So a pipeline or a workflow can have multiple jobs. So let's see what we will be using. So the first job is the build job, where firstly we define the node version. As we are working with a React application, we need to have a node and npm installed. So here we are going with node version 14. Now every job will have step. In this job the steps will be to check out the latest code from the repository master branch and then run npm run build command to generate build files for our React application. Okay, if you're working with any other languages, this is the place where you build the artifact or the build files. For React app it will basically generate a simple HTML file and a bunch of JavaScript files. Okay, now the next job is the test stage. Generally we have test cases written here, although we don't have any in our case, but I have added it here just for some reference. Okay, the most important stage is the build and the push stage. So in this we need to have a build and a test stage to be completed first, then only this stage will be initialized. Okay, so this build has to be completed as well as the test one. Okay, then only this step will be, or this job will be going to run. Okay, so the first thing what we're going to do is to check out the code. Okay, and then log in into our Docker Hub. Okay, the username and the password I have used secrets for it. So to add secrets to your workflow, you need to add it to your GitHub repository. So you can go to settings and then you can go to secrets and then actions, and here you can add different repository secrets. Okay, for our case, the Docker password, Docker username, and GitHub token. Okay, GitHub token is basically used as an authenticator. Okay, so this is the requirement to like checking into some other repository inside your profile. Okay, now back to code. Now we need to also push the image to GitHub packages. So this is similar as Docker Hub. Now the next part is to build the image and push it to the Docker Hub repository as well as GitHub. So we will use the tag for this, and we will just append it from getting it from the commit ID. Okay, the SHA from the commit ID. So this will be available in the GitHub workflow. This is an object, we can get it from there. Okay, now the SHA ID is a long string which will be appended in after like a tag. Let me show you from where you can get that. So if you go to code, so this one will be appended after your image, and this will be tagged with the latest. Okay, and this is what ArgoCD is going to use. Okay, now this push part is done. Now let's see the ArgoCD part. Okay, now the next job is to update the manifest file. So basically that is sitting in another repository, so we need to check in that repository and update that repository. Okay, so the first thing we will do here is, like you can see, we need the build and push stage to be completed first, then only this will be going to run. Okay, and then in the steps part we'll have the action part where we check out to the image. This is the repository name. Okay, then we are selecting the master branch and we are using GitHub token to basically access the repository. Now the next thing is we are going to change some git configs, like the username and the name. Generally we add it in the secrets and use it here, but I'm hard coding it here. Okay, now the next part is the set command. So this is the magic of Linux. So what we're going to do here is using the set command, it will find the GitHub actor pattern, that is I am Rishabh in my case. This is the username of my Git profile, and it will find that in the deployment file, YAML file, and it will basically change everything after that. So the GitHub actor, and that is the slash, that is, and then the repository name, which is GitOps 01. Okay, and this is the repository we are using, GitOps 01. Okay, this is the place where we have the YAML, and it will basically append all the SHA which we generated after that. So this will be our latest tag in our deployment file. Okay, and yeah, so this is the set magic of Linux command, and then we will basically add it, and then we will push the changes, and we will update the commit message as well. Okay, and yeah, this part is done. So this job is also done. Now as soon as the code is pushed to this repository, the latest code with the latest commit ID, ArgoCD will have some event that is triggered, so some push event, and basically ArgoCD will resync the whole application on our cluster, and depending on the file, the deployment file, it will update the application accordingly. Now let's install ArgoCD on your platform. So you can go to Google and search for ArgoCD, and I'm on Windows, so I will be installing it on Windows. I've already installed it, so I don't need to do that. So you can install it using this command, and to get the password you can use this command. Now after installing this, ArgoCD will have its own namespace. Let me show you. So let me see all the namespaces here. So as you can see, I have ArgoCD here, so all the deployments and all those things will be in the ArgoCD namespace. So let me go into that. As you can see, we have multiple objects of ArgoCD: services, pod, deployment, replica set, and all those stuff. Okay, now for our case, we need ArgoCD server. So this will be the server, which is basically the UI from where we can control and see all ArgoCD stuff visually. Okay, so let's just log into that using the password. Okay, now if you're working with an external cluster or on the cloud like EKS and all that stuff, you will getting an external IP, or the IP address from where you can connect to your cluster. It will be printed up here if you're working with that, but in our case we are working locally. So what we will going to do here, port forward this service so that ArgoCD can use it. So we will use some helper function here to port forward it, and we will target this pod running the ArgoCD server, and I will change the IP address of this one, okay, something like 4001, and the namespace will be ArgoCD. As soon as you press enter, you can go to that port, and you can see that we are in the ArgoCD UI. So let's just log in into that with the password. So the password, you can get it from this command, okay. I already have that password, so I'm going to log in it with admin and password. So after logging it, this is the UI of ArgoCD. So basically all those applications and all those stuff, deployments, replica set, objects, every kind of object will be shown here. Now let's add the GitOps infra repository to ArgoCD. So this one. So for that, we will go to settings, and then we'll go to repositories, connect via SSH, okay, or you can use HTTPS for that matter, but we are going to use SSH for this. The name of the repository, okay, the project, currently we are in default one, and the URL. So you just need to copy the URL and paste it up here. Apart from that, if you have private repository, you can enable the private repository and SSH into it, but we are working with the public one, so we don't need to do any changes. Connect, and as you can see, we are successfully connected to that repository. And if you go to our application, we don't have any application yet, so let's just create an application. I'll name our application as something as GitOps, okay. Project default, sync policy will be manual for now, okay. Then I will check auto create namespace, so basically creating a new namespace. And then as you can see, currently I have ArgoCD namespace in it and GitOps 01, and then I will select the repository URL and the branch, the head one, the path. If you have multiple paths in it, I will going to use the root path, which is the same one. Then the cluster info, which is the default one. If you have some EKS cluster, you will add it up here. Like you have some cluster deployed on cloud like AWS or EKS or something like that, you can add it here, okay. And the namespace, I will add a new namespace, okay. So GitOps tutorial, and apart from that, everything is good to go. You can also add volume suite, but we are not going to do that. Let's create it. Now let's open this, and as you can see, the application is currently out of sync, so we'll do a manual sync first, okay. So click on sync and then accept everything, and as you can see, it started syncing, and it will basically deploy our application with all the manifest file. So you can see it's deployed, so you can monitor everything here, like the services, replica set, deployments, pods, everything, okay. Also you can see the current status, that is synced, and synced with the current repository, with the commit author, the commit message, everything, okay. Now let's do a simple change in our React application and see if the workflow get triggered and the changes happens on ArgoCD or not. So in app.js, I will change something here, like I will change something basically to see if this is working or not. So something like first commit, okay. Let's just push it, and as soon as I push it, if I open the GitHub Actions, you can see the workflow is initialized. So let me open the GitHub file, workflow file, and see the jobs. So the first job is the build job, so, and then we have test, then everything else. So you can see they are all are dependent on each other. Let's log into Docker Hub as well and wait for the push job to be finished, so that we can see the repository pushed in Docker Hub. Okay, so let me fast forward it. Okay, so it is completed. So it took around 3 minutes. Okay, now let's go to Docker Hub and see if the push that repository has been pushed or not. So if I refresh it here, you can see we have our GitOps 01, and if I open that and if you go to the tag, you can see the tag is 81276. And if I go to our GitHub and see the tag up here, so this is the SHA number, which is exactly the same as this one. So our image is pushed, and you can see the message as well here up here. And if you open the deployment file as well, you can see the changes, the SHA is also appended up here. So this part is done. So the manifest infrastructure repository is updated with the latest changes of our React application. Now if you go to ArgoCD, you can see that the sync does not happen. So by default the sync process will initialize only after 3 minutes. So we will basically resync it again manually, but after that we will configure it in a way that anytime the push happens in this repository or the deployment file changes or any PR or any pull happens, it will basically resync it. So let me do it manually this time, and you can see it is out of sync currently. Now as you can see, the old infrastructure is getting terminated and the new one is getting created. Okay, now let's go to namespaces and see if our namespaces is created or not. So you can go to get namespaces, and as you can see we have our namespaces which we created using ArgoCD. Now let me get into that, and as you can see we have all the pod, services, deployments and replica set. Okay, the one we added in the infrastructure manifest file. So everything is running correctly here. So now let's port forward the service of React application, which is running on nginx port 80. So we will basically port forward it to our local host, and that port will be 3000. So let me add that, and yeah, and let me go to the browser, and you can see we have our first commit running up here. Okay, now let's change this to something new and see if all the process runs correctly or not. Okay, then let me change that to app.js, something like second commit, and let me just commit the changes and then push it. As you can see the workflow is started running, and let's wait to see if this changes or not. Okay, so let me fast forward this, and you can see again it take me around 2 minutes. And let me check out the SHA key, the commit ID. Okay, now let's go to infra repository, and you can see our changes here. So now let's refresh, and refresh does not happen. Why is that? So we need to kill the port forwarding and initialize it again, run it again. So let me run it again, and let's refresh it one more time. Okay, it's not working. So there must be some issue. So we missed something. Yeah, we didn't sync it up here, so we need to sync that. Okay, so let me just sync it, and as soon as we sync it, you can see new ports have been created up here. Okay, so new ports are getting created. And yeah, now let's change the port forward again. So let me cancel this one and initialize another one, and you can see second commit is here. Now this one is working, the manual part is working. So let's see how we can do the overall steps automatically, like the push part and the deployment part and the syncing part, all those stuff. So to do that, we need to add a webhook in our repository, so GitOps infra repository. So any changes happens in this repository, it will basically trigger a hook. so it will basically trigger a hook. So to add that, we need to go to our infrastructure repository, then we need to go to settings, and here we need to find webhooks. Okay, and then we can create a new webhook from here. Now if you create a new webhook, you need a payload URL. So currently we are working locally, so we don't have any payload URL, we don't have any URL where ArgoCD is deployed or some. So if you can go to services, in the ArgoCD namespace, you can see the server is running locally, so we don't have any external IP. But if you are working with an EKS or something like that, you will have some external IP here, so you can use that. But we are working locally, so we don't have that. So for that, we will use another tool, which is ngrok. So what does ngrok does is basically it basically exposes some services running locally on your system, and you can use it for like testing purposes and all those stuff. So this is the tool we will be using. So to initialize the port, the current port on which the ArgoCD server is running, we need to write ngrok up in the this. So let me first check out the port on which it is running. So yeah, 4001. Okay, the ArgoCD server is running on 4001. So let me add that port up here, http 4001. As soon as I do that, you can see it is running on, it will basically provide us with an URL, and which is pointing to 4001. Okay, so let me copy that URL, and okay, let me just copy this once again, and we go to payload URL and paste it up here, and I will go and add API/webhook. Okay, content type will be JSON, secret if you want to add, if it is a public URL, a private one if you have a private repository. And yeah, that's it. That's the part we need to do it on the webhook. So let me disable the SSL, and just a push event, all the stuff are fine. Let me just add the webhook. Okay, so the webhook is added. Now let me test this if it's working or not. You can go to recent delivery, and you can see it is currently working. So now ngrok is configured correctly, so any changes happen to this repository, it will trigger the changes, and it will basically push it to ArgoCD, and it will see that as a change, and it will synchronize the application once again. Okay, now let's do some changes in the deployment itself. So I will edit this file only, and I will change the replicas from 1 to 4, and I will add some comments up here. Updated replicas. Okay, commit changes, saving. As soon as I save it, you can see it is out of sync, it is not running again. So I think we missed something again. You see, yeah, we need to enable auto sync here, so let me enable that, and now you can see it is the infrastructure is now deploying 4 replicas. Okay, now let me change it again back to something else. So let me change the replicas to maybe 3 and see this time it does it automatically or not. Okay, update it to 3 replicas, commit changes. Let me see the Argo file now. So you can see the infrastructure has now 3 pods, and the old pods have been terminated and the new one have been created. So ArgoCD is not running with the hooks. So let me make a final change and run the overload scenario once again. So the change in the React application, the push, the building of the image and pushing it back to Docker Hub, and updating the manifest file, and then ArgoCD picking up the changes. Okay, so as soon as it does that, let me see the update. So that is second commit, so it's not completed yet, so let me wait for it to be completed. So let me fast forward this once again, and Yeah, it took around 3 minutes this time. So now let's see the changes. So as you can see, new infrastructure is getting deployed. And now if we go to our, yeah, so this is updated now, third and final commit. So we have successfully created the architecture for GitOps pattern using ArgoCD. I hope you liked the video. Please feel free to subscribe, and thanks for watching. See you next time. Thank you.